Exotics are meant to be used to help enhance a specific part of a player's loadout. Whether it affects your abilities, increases effectiveness, or adds additional charges, exotics can make or break different loadouts. I thought it might be beneficial to go over some of the most effective exotics that are being used in the Crucible right now. Welcome back to the channel, my name is Man of Coal, and today, let's go over the best hunter exotics to use in PvP. Couple things before we start the video. If you end up enjoying this video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Not only does it let me know that you guys like this type of content, but we are also very close to the YouTube partnership requirements, so subscribing really does help out the channel. About 90% of the people that watch my videos are not subscribed to the channel, which is kind of crazy to think about, so it would really mean a lot that you subscribe to the channel. And you can always unsub later if you really want to. The last thing I wanted to say is that this is my list of what I think the best hunter exotics are. These are the ones that I have used the most in PvP and that I have personally had the most success with. I know there are a ton of exotics that other people use that won't be on this list. That does not mean they are bad, it just means that I don't use them. Fair enough? Cool. All right, so with the exotics that I chose, I ended up noticing somewhat of a pattern amongst all of them. Almost all the exotics, with the exception of maybe one, I was gaining a buff to a specific mechanic that I use pretty frequently in the Crucible. I mentioned this in my last video when I ranked all of the different hunter subclasses. You can check that video out in the description. And I mentioned that I tend to favor subclasses that offer me constant benefits no matter what I'm doing. With these exotics, I noticed that most of them gave me some type of buff that were always going to be with me, or at least they provided a buff when I performed a certain mechanic. Now, these are not in any particular order, but the first exotic that I think is one of the best hunter exotics in PvP is the Dragon Shadow. Dragon Shadow is an exotic chess piece that has an exotic perk, Wraith Metal Mail, which says dodging reloads all weapons and increases both movement and weapon handling speeds for a brief time. This is an incredible armor piece to use, especially if you are rocking a max mobility hunter. Not only are you getting your dodge back every 9 seconds, but every time you do dodge, you are gaining the Wraith Metal Mail buff. If you've never used this before, it's essentially like having quick draw, snapshot, and faster reloads for all of your weapons for about 10 seconds. As I said earlier, I'm a big advocate for anything that buffs mechanics that I use frequently in the game. And with quick draw already being one of the best PvP perks to have on most weapons, the fact that I can now have it for all of my weapons at one time automatically makes me a threat in PvP. If you don't have this exotic yet, or you just haven't tried it yet, I highly suggest you try it out. The next exotic I wanted to talk about is the Stompies. These are my babies. I've used the Stompies almost exclusively since the launch of Destiny 2 when they were introduced to the loot pool. The exotic perk for Stompies is Hydraulic Boosters, which increases sprint speed and slide distance, while also improving high jump, strafe jump, and triple jump. So basically we get a big buff to our overall movement when wearing the Stompies. Again, I'm a huge fan of perks that buff mechanics that I frequently use, which I obviously am sprinting, sliding, and jumping all the time. And while this may not be one of the more fancy or elaborate exotics for a hunter to use, it certainly provides a significant advantage to a very crucial and important part of the game, our movement. The faster you can get from point A to point B, not the literal point A and point B, but you know what I mean, the quicker you can close the gap on an opponent or get to cover you need to heal back up. I would go on, but I would just be repeating myself over and over at this point. Stompies, really good and really impactful to use as a hunter in PvP. It'll give you a huge leg up in the Crucible. Next, I wanted to talk about an exotic that I have recently come to find some enjoyment while using in PvP, and that is the Gemini Jesters. The exotic perk for Gemini Jesters is Misdirection, which states that dodging disorients nearby enemies and temporarily removes their radar. This is one of those rare combination exotics that are both fun to use while also being pretty effective in PvP. The disorient isn't necessarily the important part here, as it's more so the removal of the enemy radar. This is a very strong exotic to use on maps that are a little bit smaller and have a lot of angles to ambush. A great example of using this effectively is on Cauldron. In 3v3 especially, the hotspot on Cauldron is in the center room that has the 5 different doors. The cool thing about the Geminis is that even if the opponent is on the opposite side of the wall, as long as you are within a close proximity to them, it will still disorient them through the wall, thus allowing either you or the rest of your teammates to comfortably engage with the opponent. Again, it may not be one of the craziest exotics, but the buffs that it gives you are pretty effective and can be kind of annoying to play against, as I'm sure some of you have already experienced them at some point. Next to the Stompies, these are one of my favorite exotics to use in PvP. This next exotic might come as a shock to some of you, as in my last video where I ranked all of the hunter subclasses, I kind of bashed this class's grenades, but I wanted to talk about Shinobu's Vow. In my last video, I mentioned that the only good grenade for the Arc Strider subclass was Arc Bolt grenades. However, I wasn't taking into account any exotics when I was doing these rankings. I did mention that there were some exotics that could enhance different parts of certain subclasses though. This is definitely one of those cases. New Tricks is the exotic perk for Shinobus, and it improves Skip Grenade, and you gain an additional Skip Grenade charge. Skip Grenade returns grenade energy when it damages enemies. So not only do we get better tracking of the skips, but we also get a second grenade charge. And if we end up doing damage with the skip grenades, we also get grenade energy back. There is a lot of synergy going on here with this exotic, and it is only benefiting us, which is fantastic. Skip grenades aren't terribly overpowered, but with this exotic, it makes them pretty usable in PvP, especially if you are trying to finish off opponents that are at lower health. This is the only exotic on this list that requires a specific subclass to use. So if you're an Arc Strider main, or if seeing this has made you want to try it out, then absolutely do it. They're pretty effective. Next, let's talk about a rather obviously good exotic, and one that was rather polarizing a few months ago, the Wormhusk Crown. The exotic perk for Wormhusk is Burning Souls, which says dodging gives a small health and shield bump. Now, a few months ago, this exotic was very prominent in PvP amongst hunters. Instead of giving a small health and shield bump like it does now, it used to completely heal both your shields and your health at the exact same time, and at a fairly fast pace. This was particularly annoying for many Guardians, as they would get hunters down to 1 HP, and all the hunter with the Wormhusk would have to do is use their dodge to get behind cover for long enough that they would instantly get their full health back. And by the time the player that did all the damage to the hunter re-engaged to try and kill off the weak hunter, they would already be back at full health. It was a whole conundrum that I may or may not confirm if I was one of those hunters. We'll just never know. But regardless, it has since been nerfed to what it is currently, which is still a very good exotic to use, especially if you are running a max mobility cooldown hunter. If you're like me and you really only like to use one, maybe two exotics to go with your build, I would strongly suggest that this be one of those exotics to use. And if you're able to get a high enough stat roll on it, that's just icing on the cake. And remember, exotics are never going to be sunset, so they will always be infusible to the highest possible light level. So while putting this list together, I kept debating on whether or not I should put this next exotic on the list, as it isn't one that I particularly use, but for hunters I can see it being a pretty useful exotic. So I decided to make this the honorable mention exotic, and that is the Sixth Coyote. Again, this isn't one that I necessarily use, but the exotic perk simply grants you an additional dodge charge. As a person who primarily plays hunter, I'm always using my dodge to get out of troubling situations. I have spec'd my loadout to have the fastest cooldown timer on my dodge so that I will get it back every 9 seconds. However, some people may not have their loadout spec'd the same, so having an additional dodge charge can kind of make up for that. In my opinion, I think the most effective hunter exotics are the ones that give a specific buff to any type of movement, as that is what hunters are mostly known for. Whether it is increasing sprint speed, jump height, or how many times you can dodge, these exotics tend to be the ones that are used the most. If you play as a hunter, what are some of the other exotics that you tend to use more? Are there any different exotics that you use that were not on the list today? Let me know down in the comments. Again, if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button. It would really mean a lot. Links to all of my affiliate discounts as well as my social media platforms are also in the description box as well. Thank you all very much for watching. A positive rating is always appreciated. And as always, we'll see ya.